911, what is your emergency?
Oh my God, please! It's the whale, the orca! At BlueSea! Oh God!
Ma'am, calm down. What's happening? At the marine park?
She's dragging her under! A trainer! He's got her! No, she's trapped! The water is, oh my God, no!
The shimmering blue of the water held a deadly secret. For a decade she had danced with giants, a graceful ballet of trust and perceived understanding. Elise Moreau. Her name echoed through the marine park world, synonymous with an almost mythical connection to the ocean's apex predators. But what if that connection was nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion? What if the inherent wildness lurking beneath the surface was always on the verge of eruption? And what if the price of that deception was paid in the most horrifying way imaginable? Tonight, we delve into the terrifying last moments of Elise Moreau, a tragedy that rips back the curtain on the captivating yet fatally flawed world of marine park entertainment. This is more than a simple story about an animal attack. It's an exploration of the dangers we often choose to ignore, the chilling warnings that go unheeded, and the profound ethical questions that linger long after the screams fall silent. Elise Moreau's story began far from the sprawling tanks of BlueSea Sanctuary, in the rugged, windswept beauty of coastal Brittany, France. From a young age, the ocean was not a place of fear for her, but one of profound wonder. She spent her childhood summers at the water's edge, not building sandcastles, but observing the rhythm of the tides and the creatures that inhabited the rock pools. This deep-seated fascination propelled her across continents, a determined young woman with a singular ambition: to understand and connect with marine life on a deeper level than anyone had before. Her journey eventually brought her to the sun-drenched shores of Santa Cruz, California, a vibrant hub for marine research and, fatefully, the burgeoning marine park industry. Her talent was undeniable. She possessed a rare combination of patience, intuition, and an almost uncanny ability to anticipate the movements of the massive creatures she worked with. Her star rose quickly through the ranks, a testament to her dedication and what many saw as a natural, almost spiritual mastery. She was a natural communicator, not just with people, but with the animals. While other trainers relied on commands and whistles, Elise focused on building a genuine rapport, a bond of mutual respect. It was this approach that set her apart, and it was this approach that would ultimately lead her to Kaela. Elise had a quiet intensity about her, a burning passion that often bordered on obsession. Her colleagues described her as a workaholic, the last one to leave the tank at night, often found sitting by the water's edge long after the crowds had gone home, simply watching the orcas. She lived and breathed this place, one former colleague recalled, more so than anyone I've ever known. For Elise, the tank was not a job. It was her life, her sanctuary, a place where she felt a sense of purpose that nothing else could provide. The bond she built with the animals was her everything. It was her identity. She believed with every fiber of her being that by working with these animals, she was helping bridge the gap between human and non-human worlds, proving that a deep and meaningful connection was possible. She often wrote in her personal journal about the profound intelligence in Kaela's eyes, the playful nudges and gentle sounds the orca would make just for her. She saw Kaela not as a show animal, but as a misunderstood genius, a magnificent soul trapped by circumstance. This emotional attachment, this absolute belief in her unique bond, became both her greatest strength and her most devastating vulnerability. It was a connection so profound that it might have blinded her to the very real and present danger. And then there was Kaela. She was a killer whale, or orca, the largest of the oceanic dolphin family, a title that doesn't begin to describe the sheer scale of her power. An adult female orca can weigh up to 12,000 pounds and measure over 25 feet in length, a locomotive of muscle and instinct. Kaela had been torn from her wild Icelandic pod in her early years, a violent and traumatic experience that, even decades later, would have undoubtedly left deep psychological scars. In the wild, orcas are complex, highly social animals. They live in matriarchal pods, hunt cooperatively, and communicate through a sophisticated language of clicks, whistles, and pulsed calls. They are perpetual nomads, traveling over 100 miles a day in their natural habitat, covering vast territories in the open ocean. To confine a creature of this scale and complexity to the concrete and glass walls of a tank is to impose a level of sensory deprivation that is almost unimaginable. Kaela's world was a fraction of what it should have been. Her auditory senses, designed to navigate the vast ocean with sonar, were constantly bombarded by the reverberating noise of the filtration systems and the cheers of the crowd. Her social life, meant to be a rich tapestry of relationships with her pod, was limited to a handful of other captive orcas, often with unstable social dynamics. Early behavioral reports, often dismissed or downplayed by park management, hinted at a volatile temperament. Minor incidents, a sudden thrash of her immense tail, a delayed or outright ignored response to a command, an unnerving intensity in her gaze, were brushed aside as normal animal behavior. Yet for some observant trainers, a disquieting pattern began to emerge. Kaela was different, more unpredictable, more resentful. She was a wild spirit, confined, and that inherent rage, a product of her traumatic capture and decades of sensory deprivation, was a ticking time bomb. The warning signs were there for anyone willing to see them. They weren't a sudden crack in the foundation. They were a slow, steady erosion, a series of increasingly disquieting incidents that were systematically ignored. Years before the tragedy, Kaela had a history of what internal reports referred to as uncooperative conduct. These were not just minor lapses in training. In 2021, an incident was logged during a training session. Kaela, seemingly agitated by something unknown, suddenly veered from her routine and lunged at a new male trainer, holding him against the side of the tank by his leg. The incident was over in a minute, but a minute can feel like an eternity when a 12,000-pound animal is pinning you down. The trainer was shaken, but uninjured. The official report was buried, filed under behavioral abnormality, and dismissed as a one-off. A senior trainer told him, "You'll learn to read them better. She was just playing." The unspoken message was clear: don't make a fuss. But the incidents grew in frequency and intensity. There was the time she became fixated on a young trainer's hair bun and refused to release him, forcing other trainers to distract her. Or the time she slammed her tail against the gate to the medical pool with such force that it dented the steel. These weren't playful gestures, they were displays of immense frustration and aggression. The internal memos from the head trainers to park management grew more urgent. Subject: Kaela exhibits heightened aggression and a lack of compliance, one memo read. Another warned: recommend immediate suspension of in-water work with Kaela until behavioral issues can be addressed. But these pleas were met with cold indifference from the corporate offices. The reason was simple. Kaela was the park's main draw. Her performances sold tickets, filled seats, and generated revenue. Pulling her from the shows was not an option. The pressure on the trainers was immense. They were told to manage the behavior, to use positive reinforcement, and to be more assertive. But how do you assert yourself against a creature of that size and power? Elise, with her deep emotional attachment, often defended Kaela. She would argue that the orca was stressed or misunderstood. She truly believed that their bond was unique, an unbreakable shield against Kaela's latent aggression. This belief, tragically, gave her a false sense of security, causing her to dismiss the warnings that even her more cynical colleagues were taking seriously. The tension among the trainers was palpable, a silent acknowledgement that they were all living on borrowed time, dancing a deadly waltz with an animal that was teetering on the edge of a breakdown. The cracks in the illusion were deepening, and it was only a matter of time before it shattered completely. June 12th, the day of the final performance. The air at BlueSea Sanctuary was thick with the usual weekend energy. The stadium was packed to capacity, the afternoon sun glinting off the surface of the massive Orca tank. Families clutched popcorn and drinks, their eyes glued to the water, their anticipation a tangible force in the warm air. The routine began smoothly, a mesmerizing spectacle of synchronized jumps, powerful tail splashes, and graceful glides. Elise, dressed in her signature wetsuit, stood at the edge of the pool, her hand raised in a familiar gesture. For the first few minutes, everything was perfect. Kaela responded to every cue, her immense body moving with a fluid grace that belied her size. The crowd erupted in cheers as she breached, her sleek black and white form launching out of the water, a magnificent display of raw power and control. But as the show progressed to a new segment, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift occurred. As Elise gave the cue for a complex maneuver, a fast-paced swim followed by a playful splash, Kaela hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. It was a momentary lapse, a beat out of rhythm in their well-rehearsed choreography. To the audience, it was nothing. To Elise, it must have been a prickle of cold unease. She repeated the command, her voice calm and reassuring. And then, the music became a horrifying backdrop to the unfolding nightmare. With a terrifying lightning-fast speed, Kaela veered from the expected pattern. Instead of a playful splash, she turned her immense bulk towards Elise. The intent was no longer playful. It was chillingly, brutally direct. A collective gasp of horror ripped through the crowd as Kaela slammed into Elise with tremendous force. The impact threw the trainer off balance, sending her tumbling into the churning water. The playful splashes of moments ago were instantly transformed into a violent vortex of thrashing limbs, white foam, and a sickeningly dark crimson stain blooming in the water. Screams erupted from the stands, a horrifying wave of terror washing over the once joyful scene. Parents grabbed their children, pulling them close, their faces contorted in disbelief and fear. Kaela, with relentless power, began to push and submerge Elise, her massive body dwarfing the struggling trainer. Onlookers, their hands shaking, fumbled for their phones, their lenses capturing the unfolding horror. Each forceful thrash of Kaela's tail, each prolonged submersion drew horrified gasps and choked sobs from the witnessing families. The pool, a stage for harmony, had become a brutal arena. Elise fought back with the primal instinct of survival, her arms flailing, her body twisting in a desperate attempt to escape Kaela's relentless assault. She had spent a decade in this water. She knew its every secret, but against the crushing force and immense weight of the Orca, her efforts were tragically futile. Kaela's grip was not one of teeth, but of overwhelming muscular force and strategic maneuvering, a horrifying display of a predator's raw power. The air crackled with fear, the joyous music replaced by the sounds of frantic splashing, muffled screams, and the anguished cries of those who stood frozen, helpless on the sidelines. A young boy in the front row began to wail, a high-pitched sound of terror that cut through the chaos. "Mommy, what's happening to her?" he cried. His mother could only hold him, her own eyes wide with shock. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Trainers on the edge of the pool blew frantic whistles, banged on the sides of the tank, threw buckets of fish, anything to distract the enraged animal. But Kaela remained fixated, her focus locked on Elise. The brutal assault continued, the line between entertainment and tragedy irrevocably blurred. Finally, after what seemed like an age of unimaginable terror, Kaela released Elise. Her lifeless body, pale and still, floated to the surface, a stark and devastating testament to the raw power of the wild animal held captive. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sobs of horrified witnesses. The immediate aftermath was pure chaos. The stadium was evacuated with a terrifying efficiency, the festive atmosphere replaced by a heavy shroud of grief and shock. Police cruisers and ambulances arrived, their flashing lights casting a macabre glow over the scene. Onlookers stood frozen, staring at the empty tank, their minds replaying the horrific footage they had just captured. Paramedics, their faces grim, moved with a grim purpose. But there was no hope. Elise Moreau was pronounced dead at the scene. The official cause of death was later confirmed to be from blunt force trauma and drowning, a chilling testament to the sheer crushing force of the 12,000-pound animal. Police officers took witness statements, but many were too distraught to speak coherently. "It was like something out of a horror movie," one tearful woman recounted to a detective. "One second they were dancing, the next and it was just a slaughter." Another man, still shaking, described the terrifying speed of the attack. "There was no warning. One second she was on the platform, the next she was gone." The initial 911 call became a grim piece of evidence, a raw, unedited recording of a living nightmare. The media descended like vultures. Television news vans lined the streets outside BlueSea, reporters giving live updates, their voices solemn. The viral videos, shot by the horrified crowd, were played on a loop on every news channel. A raw and unedited look at the moment a beloved trainer's life was tragically cut short. The raw footage sent shockwaves across the globe, sparking a global conversation about the morality of marine parks. Protests, fueled by outrage and grief, began to erupt outside BlueSea's gates almost immediately. Activists from animal rights organizations, marine biologists, and enraged members of the public gathered, holding signs with slogans like "Free Kaela," "Justice for Elise," and "A tank is not a home." BlueSea Sanctuary's first response was a sterile corporate statement expressing condolences and promising a full investigation. It was met with immediate public fury. The public wanted answers, not platitudes. What followed was a flood of leaked documents and whistleblower accounts that painted a horrifying picture of a corporate cover-up and systemic neglect. Former trainers, emboldened by the tragedy, came forward with their own stories, shattering the park's carefully crafted narrative. One former trainer, a woman named Anna, who had worked with Kaela years before Elise, spoke to the media under a pseudonym. "They knew," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of grief and rage. "We all knew. Kaela was different. She had a history. They called her headstrong. We called her a ticking time bomb." Anna described a specific incident from 2 years prior, an event that had been officially logged as a training difficulty, but was far more sinister. It was a day during a simple feeding session. Kaela had refused a command, then suddenly and without provocation, lunged at a younger male trainer, grabbing his leg with her jaws. She didn't bite down to injure, but rather, she held him, pinning him against the wall of the tank for over a minute, her immense weight trapping him. Another trainer had to use a distress signal to get her to release him. The incident was documented, and the official report, a 6-page document titled Incident Report 2023-44 Orca Trainer Interaction, was buried. It was dismissed as a moment of playful dominance, and the footage was reportedly deleted. Anna's testimony was corroborated by other former employees who spoke anonymously. They described a culture of fear, where trainers who voiced concerns about an animal's behavior were often reprimanded or sidelined. The memos were stark. "Subject Kaela exhibits heightened aggression and a lack of compliance," one memo read. Another warned, "Recommend immediate suspension of in-water work with Kaela until behavioral issues can be addressed." But these pleas were met with cold indifference from the corporate offices. The reason was simple. Kaela was the park's main draw. Her performances sold tickets, filled seats, and generated revenue. Pulling her from the shows was not an option. The autopsy reports, when they were finally released, were chillingly precise. Elise's cause of death was not from a bite or a direct attack with teeth. It was from blunt force trauma, consistent with repeated powerful compressions and submersions. The report detailed multiple broken bones, severe internal bleeding, and asphyxiation from drowning. It was a horrifying testament to the sheer crushing force of a 12,000-pound animal. The report noted that Kaela had not sought to kill. She had simply acted on a predatory instinct, a behavior that, in her world, would be normal, but in the context of the confined tank and the presence of a human had become a fatal act. This cold, clinical data only fueled the public's outrage. Protests erupted outside BlueSea's gates. Activists from animal rights organizations, marine biologists, and enraged members of the public gathered, holding signs with slogans like "Free Kaela" and "Justice for Elise." They argued that the true villain wasn't Kaela, but the industry that had exploited her. Dr. Alistair Finch, a renowned marine biologist, appeared on news programs, his voice filled with urgency. An orca is a sentient, highly intelligent creature. It lives in a complex social structure and travels over 100 miles a day in the wild. To confine it to a tank is a form of sensory deprivation. You're asking a human to live in a bathtub for their entire life. The aggression we see is not a sign of headstrong behavior. It's a symptom of a deep psychological illness caused by profound stress and frustration. Kaela's behavior was a cry for help that no one listened to. The mounting pressure was too great for BlueSea Sanctuary to ignore. They suspended all orca shows indefinitely, a move seen by many as too little, too late. The company's stock plummeted and lawsuits began to pile up, not just from Elise's family, but from shareholders and former employees. The illusion had not only shattered the lives of those involved, but had brought the entire multi-billion-dollar industry to a grinding halt. Elise Moreau was not just a trainer. She was a daughter, a friend, a beloved colleague. Her memorial service was a quiet, solemn affair, attended by her family and former peers. In their eulogies, they spoke of her passion, her kindness, and her unwavering belief in the bond she had forged with Kaela. But beneath the surface of their grief, there was a simmering anger, a shared understanding that this was a death that should never have happened. Her passing, though tragic, became a catalyst for change. The public outcry led to the introduction of a new piece of legislation, the Orca Protection Act. The proposed law aimed to prohibit the breeding of orcas in captivity, restrict their use in entertainment, and mandate the retirement of existing captive orcas to sea sanctuaries. The bill faced an uphill battle, but it was a testament to how one terrible moment could spark a revolution. And what of Kaela? She was isolated in the tank where the tragedy occurred. Her fate became a public debate. Some argued for her release into the wild, a monumental and potentially impossible task given her years in captivity. Others demanded that she be euthanized, calling her a danger to human life. She remained in isolation, the very animal that had been the star of the show now a pariah, a living embodiment of the industry's greatest failure. The Orca Protection Act was eventually passed, a diluted but significant version of the original proposal. It didn't free the orcas, but it changed the industry forever, stopping the breeding and reducing the shows to non-performance-based presentations. A small victory born from an immense tragedy. In the end, Kaela was not a monster. She was a wild soul in a box, a prisoner of circumstances beyond her control. Her aggression was not malice. It was a desperate reaction to a life lived in confinement, a life that promised harmony but delivered only frustration. Elise Moreau, in her unwavering belief in a bond that could transcend the boundaries of nature, became a casualty of the very illusion she had worked so hard to create. And as you look at the last remaining captive orcas in the world, consider this. How many more lives will it take to finally understand that a show of trust with a captive animal is not a reflection of that animal's heart, but simply a terrifying act of faith? An act that, for Elise Moreau, ended in a final, chilling silence.